You're listening to English with Monty, the podcast about the English language. Today is 8-Minute English, talking about articles. Hi there, this is 8-Minute English with Monty. Today we're going to have a look at articles. Articles can be a little bit tricky. I haven't got any help from Nicola or Gideon today, unfortunately. I'm going to try and tackle this on my own, so I'll try and make it as clear as possible. Please do write in if you want any extra help or if something is not quite clear. When I talk about articles, I'm talking about I'm talking about a, and I'm talking about an, but also I'm talking about no article at all, because sometimes there are no articles. The first starting point probably would be to do with an. I came across this with one of my students the other day, and she's based in Belarus. And I think for Belarusian people it's quite difficult because I don't think they have articles in the same way as English. But basically, if you have an, you have to have a vowel after it. And when I say a vowel, I say A, E, I, O, U. So just to give you a few examples with a singular noun beginning with a vowel, so for example, an elephant, an egg, an apple, an idiot, or an orphan. Obviously there you're using an. Also be careful a little bit because you can be slightly different as well. Obviously you would say an umbrella, but if the sound of U in this case becomes a consonant sound, so for example, a user or a university or a unicycle. In this case, you don't use an because it's a U sound rather than an sound. And then also as well with H, typically with H, you would say a hotel. But if the H is not voiced, then you would say, for example, an honest man. That would be another case when you would use an. Giving you an example of where you use a or an, obviously including the idea of changing it slightly because of the vowel sounds. It's basically the first time when you mention something. So for example, I saw an old woman with a cat. Basically when you say what something is, so as an adjective, for example, it's a nice car, it's a lovely car, things like that. So you always need to use the a before the adjective and before the noun. Then you would talk about potentially what somebody does as a job. She is a student. I am a teacher. So we would always use the article in that case as well. And certain exclamations like, for example, what? So what a terrible day, or what's a beautiful day. I prefer the second example. That's much better. And then also expressions like 3 times a week. You can also say 3 times per week. That's kind of an interchangeable thing there as well. That's more or less it with indefinite articles. So that would be indefinite articles, a or an. So moving on to the. Basically, it's when we talk about something we've already mentioned. For example, I saw an old woman with a cat and the cat was eating. Obviously, this time you're talking about the cat in the second part, and therefore you're saying the, because we know which cat you're talking about. And then if you talk about something where there's only one of something, for example, the sea, for example, the moon, so the moon goes around the sun. And also when it's clear what you're referring to, I can say, oh, open the door. Typically, we know which door you're talking about, or you would know which door you're talking about because there'll only be one that we're referencing in that case. Also, things like places in a town, for example, a cinema, a theatre, the park, for example. I'm going to the park. That would be always used with the. I guess this comes from the idea that maybe in the past or in a small town, you would only have one park. And so therefore, you'd reference it like that. So I'm going to the park, as in being the only park. Also, we would use it with superlatives, of course. So you'd have a comparative, so I am taller than you, and then you would say I am the tallest. That would be the superlative, meaning that I'm taller than everybody else. And you don't use the in certain situations. So when you're speaking in general, you wouldn't use the. For example, you could say women are much better at languages than men. In my experience, that's true. Sorry, men. Then, for example, you could say love is more important than money. I mean, of course, love and money in this case, they're not plural. They are just nouns as subjects. So in that case, yes, I mean, basically, you don't use an article. You wouldn't say the love, you wouldn't say the money. The only time you would use that is if you're being very specific, and that would be the same with a plural noun as well. For example, if I say the love of a dog is a wonderful thing, there I'm being very specific. Therefore, you would use the. The money in my pocket is going to be used to buy my mum a present. So then again, I'm being very specific. So that's the reason why. Obviously, with the plurals, we could say that too. The women over the road are my friends. Obviously, there you're being very specific again. So that is another reason for using that. Also, it's with certain nouns. For example, home, work, school, church, just to name a few. For example, he's not at home today, so you don't say at the home, you would just say at home. I get back from work at 6:30. Again, here you don't say from the work, I just say work in general. So I guess with this one, it's to do with places where you typically go. University could also be included in this, of course. It doesn't have to be just school. That could be another element. So I go to university every day. You wouldn't say I go to the university. So that's another good example. And then, of course, you've got before meals, days, and months. For example, breakfast. I always have a big breakfast on Sunday morning. Sunday, you don't need to use the. And also with breakfast, you don't need to use that either. And that would be the same for lunch and dinner as well. A common mistake I find, I think this is normally with Latin speakers, I find this with Italians quite a lot when they say the next Friday, but you would just say next Friday or last Friday, for example. You don't need to say the. Those are just a few examples. There are quite a few more. I think I'm going to do another episode on this one because it can be quite tricky with articles. I hope that's helped so far. I mean, I think there are some similarities between languages. Obviously, if there are those similarities, then try and think about them and try and make those connections. You've been listening to 8 Minute English. Thanks for listening.